There's actually this 5-step process for using a brand to build wealth.
Essentially, what you want to have is a plan where you're going to grow your wealth personally, and you have to have a path to get there and work backwards from a goal.
A big part of this is your inventory planning process. This formula withstands the test of time. It's going to be true forever, and you don't have to wait for the next ecom asset bubble. Dylan, episode 39, knocking on the door of 40. What's happening, man? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I'm looking forward to talking about this today. Building wealth with your ecom brand. Business is a money game, as you like to say. So it's good to think about the bigger picture sometimes. So I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, man, I've been thinking about this a lot, coming off a break from the holiday season. This is our first episode that we're recording in 2026. I've been thinking a lot about building businesses that last, right? Because if you think about all the conversations we've had on Ecom Scaling Show, a lot of times we're trying to help founders not make uninformed decisions or decisions that are not strategic, in the sense that a lot of these bad decisions get made trying to serve the short term or serve emotional impulses, right, as you're scaling your brand. So I've been thinking a lot about how do we help brand founders build something lasting? And as I think about this, what I'm realizing is that a lot of brand founders that I talk to, they think that exiting for a big multiple, that's the path to wealth. And honestly, unfortunately, I think this is a lie that really got accelerated during COVID. The pandemic era, e-commerce brands, there was a huge asset bubble driven by a number of different factors. And in reality, there's actually this 5-step process for using a brand to build wealth. This is actually applicable to all businesses. So step 1, build a business on a foundation of profitable unit economics. Dylan, what's the first things that come to mind for how a D2C brand founder can engineer profitable unit economics in their business?
Probably not selling the most commoditized item ever. If you have if you're in a very competitive category with low differentiation, you're going to naturally have a harder time. Certain categories also lend themselves to being higher margin, but broadly speaking, it is rare to see a D2C brand have a lot of success if their variable margin is worse than, say, 50%.
Yeah.
Meaning once you've taken landed COGS, shipping costs to the customer, and gateway costs, you want to make sure that as a percentage of net sales is at least leaving you with 50% margin left over. And a lot of brands can even have better than that. Now, there's obviously exceptions, but you want to make sure you're entering a category where you can probably sustain that. If you're entering a newer category, maybe it's a new category in your business or your first category for a new business, you want to make sure that even if you don't have, say, 50% variable margin out of the gate, there's a path to getting there as your MOQs go up or with some economies of scale. So that's definitely one piece of it. And the other piece of it is, if you're going to be a business that doesn't have very high LTV, you probably need to have even more variable margin to give more room for CAC, which has a small exception. If you're selling a $1,000 item and you have 50% margin, so $500 of CAC to work with, you may be fine. But you really want to make sure that you're thinking about a business that has the ability to support ad spend at scale, be it through margin dollars /% and or LTV. And the best businesses for ecom traditionally are high margin businesses that also have high lifetime value. You brought up revenue durability. I think that consumer in general is probably one of the lowest revenue durability industries that you can play the game of business within. But there's pros and cons to everything. So if you want to chase durability, you really want to make sure and consistency. You really want to have healthy margins, healthy LTV, and over time, healthy diversification.
Yeah, there's a couple of things as you were talking, a couple of things I want to emphasize and maybe build on when it comes to building a foundation of profitable unit economics. The first thing is dollars, not just margin percentage, right? I generally agree with you that at least 50% gross margin is needed for a brand to be successful at scale. You also have to look at how many dollars are there, because you could have 50% of 1,000, which is your example. You could have 50% of 20, 50% of, honestly, you could have 80% of 20. And if you don't have any LTV, even if you have LTV, that may be very, very hard, right? Like, so you got to measure your unit economics in dollars per order, not just percent, like margin percentage of revenue. Certainly when you're launching new products, you need to bake that into your pricing assumptions and to your cost assumptions. You need to be careful that you do your homework, your marketing research, and that the market can actually bear your price. Because I do see some brands like, oh, we'll just sell it for this much. You got to do your marketing homework to make sure you can sell it for that much. And then furthermore, you need to be careful that you truly know the new channel's variable costs, because Amazon has vastly different variable costs than D2C. Wholesale and physical retail has vastly different unit economic or variable costs than both of those other channels. So do your homework and make sure you know those before you launch at scale. And I guess the other thing that I'll mention too, this is something I think about a lot when it's like, when you're thinking about, creating new products, do some thinking about the size and the weight of the product relative to its price. That's not the only factor to consider, but where I see a lot of brands get it wrong is big, bulky, heavy, low value, low price, right? What's one of the reasons besides high LTV that like supplements can kill it? Small, light, relative to price, right? So I think those are some of the big things to think of. So yeah, step one, build a business of on a foundation of profitable unit economics. Step two, this is really where I want to get your take on the growth marketing, Dylan. Scale unit level profitability, which we've created in step one, to create company level profitability. That's what you guys are in the business of, right? Is scaling profitable unit economics to generate company level profitability. What are some of the most important things that you think of there of like how to carry out step two?
Yeah, so there's a few different games we like to say. So there's the high LTV game. So traditionally, this is going to be like a replenishable product more often than not. High SKU count, often things like apparel. And then you have new customer dominant durable goods. So often these are going to be more expensive. It's often a little bit more unique, where it's a one-time buy or a unlikely to see a huge amount of LTV after. And all of these things have different variables to consider. I would say that a few things that come to mind when thinking about constructing the unit economics for each of these. So for the high LTV game, you want to make sure that the actual like form factor makes sense, meaning that if you're going to have replenishments, maybe it's better that they happen more frequently so the CAC to LTV looks better versus less frequently. How are you bundling these items together? Is it 2 at a time, 4 at a time, 12 at a time, 20 at a time? Like there's so many different things on a product bundling and LTV side that you can optimize, that you have a lot to play with, not just margin, but the actual like offer itself. For high SKU count and apparel, um, unit economics matters a lot. So thinking about your variable margin, but you have to also remember to factor in things like returns. So now this is true for everything, but specifically for apparel based businesses, you have to almost factor that in when thinking about your margins. And then on the durable goods side, oftentimes higher AOV, you want to make sure that the product you're selling, if there's not going to be many repeat purchases, you probably need it to be pretty expensive, at least $100. But like
I
ideally,
agree, man.
ideally hundreds of dollars. Like if I see a business that has like a $50 AOV, even if it works, like I'm sure there's an exception, but like I just wouldn't want to run it. Like, and if I did, I want to like just understand the game I'm playing, that like the probability of it lasting at a high amount of scale, unless you have something that's truly novel and unique, if it's one time buy, you got to be careful. So those are kind of early
Totally.
games and some things you got to think about for all of them.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize that $100 minimum AOV for the, durable goods game, new customer dominant, no repeat purchase. I've seen a couple brands who are like in the $40 to $50 range. And at the beginning, when they launched their product, it was novel, but there was no durable protection. There was no IP protection. It was something that could just be
Yeah,
copied
yeah,
by a
yeah.
China. And they did make a ton of money their first couple years, but then their margins really started eroding as competition came into the game. And so that's super important. A couple of things I was thinking about as you were talking, like, look, one, with step two, scaling unit level profitability, this is all about generating after ad costs positive contribution margin dollars per order, right? And scaling that to generate company level profitability, which means covering your fixed overhead plus more dollars beyond that. Um, A couple other things to consider from the finance perspective to make this step work. You need to control your variable costs at scale. Obviously, marketing, which Dylan was touching on, but I'm talking about supplier cost, right? And one of the biggest places where I see supplier costs get screwed up is actually supplier quality. Connecting this back to the returns thing that you were talking about, Dylan, is that at scale, you start scaling up and all of a sudden you start getting big batches of like defective or low quality product that gets returned that totally destroys the profitable unit economics that you engineered in step one. So like keeping supplier quality consistent and minimizing returns is key. The other two things I see get really screwed up at scale, freight in and freight out. That as you're scaling and things start getting chaotic, the brand starts having to air freight stuff, right, which is a higher per unit cost, or they're not putting the right volume of SKUs in the right 3PL warehouses, and they're starting to get a bunch of shipments coming from the wrong warehouse. Some shipment to New York coming from the California warehouse, right? And that starts screwing up your profitable unit economics. So those are things to really, really consider. The last thing I'll say is really do some strategic thinking about TAM, because the smaller your TAM, the more risk that your profitable unit economics will become unprofitable as you scale. And but when we're talking about the different games, the beauty of the high LTV game is that a fixed TAM within like a given market, you can sell into it again and again and again. So you almost have this bigger TAM, even though you have the same number of potential customers. Whereas if you're new customer dominant, you sell into that TAM once and you're kind of one and done. So those are some things that I was thinking about.
Yeah, I think like I know we're about to get into like how we think about distributions and optimizing for distributions. I think when you think about wealth building, outside of exiting, if you're doing it based off of distributions and compounding those distributions in some sort of an investment vehicle, the way this actually gets big generally is you do it for a prolonged period of time. And I made this comment earlier, but like the revenue durability of a consumer business, it actually can be good, but oftentimes in the like low eight figures to and seven figures, it is not very good. And that's more common in like the one-time product, high first-time customer dominant businesses, where you have to basically find your angle to produce durability. A lot of
For
high
sure.
LTV businesses have a lot of durability because they have such sticky customers over time that even if there is a bad quarter, you kind of have a lot of time to figure it out because you can kind of ride out that return customer base. And in clothing and apparel or like high SKU count stores, you kind of have this like diversified basket of products that as long as you've reached a certain amount of scale, you're not reliant on a single SKU. And the ones that are the least likely, in my opinion, to be able to produce those healthy distributions for 10, 15 years are the one-time products. And those one-time products are fine. They can be great businesses, but you have to realize that you have to get like sales channel diversification fast, and or you have to start getting into more products to produce that like offer durability.
100%. I've seen that so many times. So just that is definitely true in my experience. So we've got step one, build a business on a foundation of profitable unit economics. Step two, scale unit level profitability to create company level profitability. Step three, optimize your balance sheet management to create, that's right, distributable cash flow. That's what I'm talking about. I've got a lot to say about this, but I want you to go first, Dylan. What are some of the first things that come to mind for you when it comes to how growth marketing plays into optimizing the balance sheet?
I think the biggest thing, and this is probably something that growth marketing teams in general do a poor job of, is actually having a say and a contribution in the demand planning process. So when you think about distributions, it's not based off of profit, it's based off of free cash flow. And a lot of ecom brands have profit but really poor cash flow. And it's often because they're selling profitably, but they're selling the wrong thing. Meaning like if you're forecasting to sell this many of this unit, this unit, this unit, this unit, you may sell through your units profitably, but if you're making POs because you have some slow stock or dead stock or whatever you want to call it, it's possible that you're really not seeing that much cash flow come out of the business. And I think that executing very effectively on demand planning is one of the ways that you can do better on the distribution side. I
Totally.
think that's one piece of it. I think the finance and the financial planning of it is probably a bigger piece in John's world. But demand planning certainly can be a big one. And if you do it wrong, it can certainly need to be the biggest issue.
Totally, totally.
But assuming you're doing it well, there's probably opportunity to do it even better if that kind of flow is getting workflow, sorry, is getting kind of passed off or passed on to the marketing team, so they can not only optimize for profit but also for the right profit, the right sell through to maximize your ability to do your distributions.
Yeah. So I want to give a simple example because actually sometimes it is hard for brand founders to think through like, how could I be this profitable but have no cash flow? Caveat, like disclaimer, this is a very oversimplified example, but it illustrates the concept. If in a given year, your brand made $1 million, right? But during that year, from beginning to end, your inventory levels went up by $1,001. All of that $1,000,000 you made, plus an extra dollar beyond that, is tied up in the increased inventory that you now have on hand. So there's an example of how you can be a 7-figure bottom line brand and actually have one less dollar at the end of the year than you had at the beginning of the year. And so you what this all comes back to is something called the cash conversion cycle. So the cash conversion cycle is number of days of inventory on hand plus the number of days it takes you to collect your receivables if you have B2B receivables, minus the number of days on average that your vendors finance your inventory purchases. That's called your payables days. So there's really two, let's just remove AR because we're talking about the D2C world, right? So there's really two areas to focus on. Days inventory on hand, which like Dylan mentioned, a big part of this is your inventory planning process. It's almost all of it, quite frankly. And but then the second one that I think is neglected too frequently by brands, payables days. On average, how many days do your suppliers finance your inventory purchases? So this is something that you should be, if your brand is scaling, right? If your brand is scaling, that means you're giving more and more business to your suppliers every month, every quarter, every year, right? Depending on how frequently you're ordering. You should be going to your vendors and showing them, give them the numbers, show them how your business with them is increasing. Show them the dollar value of how much more you're purchasing from them every month, every quarter, every year. And give them a pitch just as if they're an investor. Give them a pitch on where you are taking the business and that you want to take them with you, and figure out how to continuously work on negotiating your payment terms, and be okay with doing it in increments. Think of it as like just walking up a set of stairs. You don't need to jump all the way to the top. You can go one step at a time. Get a few more days of payment terms every couple months, and don't ever stop this endeavor. Keep asking. Keep asking. And it's like the old kind of, first off, they want your business if you're truly growing. And if you're a good partner, you pay on time, and you know, you've built trust, they're going to want to keep your business because there's a lot of crappy customers out there. If you're a good customer, they want to keep the good ones, right? Figure out what you can give them and what you can ask for in return. It's not a one and done. You should do this for as long as you work with that particular vendor. That's the easy, or the more low hanging fruit. I don't want to say it's easy, but then also as you grow and scale, start looking at duplicate supply chains, or redundant suppliers. The person who wins in any negotiation is, one, the person who can walk away, but also the person that has multiple offers that need to be competitive. Dave Ramsey always says, every significant purchase, get at least 3 options. Even if you end up going with the same one every time, always get 3 to keep your vendors honest. So definitely attack payables days, because the better payment terms you can get, the better your cash conversion cycle will get. And guess what? Then you move on to step 4 of this process we're going through, and you can distribute cash flow to the owners. That's what we're ultimately trying to get to here. So step 1, build a business on profitable unit economics. Step 2, scale unit level profitability to create company level profitability. Step 3, optimize your balance sheet to create distributable cash flow. Step 4, distribute cash flow to owners. Dylan, you got any thoughts on your end in terms of like things to consider as a brand is thinking about distributing cash flow?
One of the hardest questions is like how much to distribute. And I think that's kind of, that kind of gets into step 5 a little bit too of, what you're using the cash flow for and what the utility of it is. I think that there's kind of like 2 camps I'll often see where you either don't distribute enough when you probably should be because,
Mhm.
you don't want to only bet on eventually exiting, or you want to pull out too much and it actually like, throttles growth. And no one's going to ever have a perfect answer, but from my perspective, you want to think of, if I'm going to distribute this capital, how is this hurting my business or does it not hurt it at all? Like if it would be irresponsible for me to like just buy more inventory for whatever reason, maybe it does make sense for me to distribute the excess. And I think that's one of the kind of questions that I think you have to get into before you think about how you deploy the capital. But curious your thoughts on that, John.
Yeah, so this is different for everybody, but there's like a few factors to think through and answer them for your situation, right? The first one is have a strategy for how much idle cash to hold. And that is really about like, what is the purpose of cash when it comes to business and investing? The purpose of cash is actually to offset risk and to take advantage of opportunities. It isn't really any other use for cash when you have your investing, when you have your finance hat on, right? Cash exists to take advantage of opportunities and to offset risk. So when you think about your strategy for how much idle cash to hold, you just have to ask yourself, how much risk is there in my business? How much risk tolerance do I have? And how much cash do I want to have on hand to take advantage of opportunities? Keep in mind, cash doesn't have to be on hand either to take advantage of opportunities. Cash can be available to take advantage of opportunities. So one thing that this is kind of like this is a pro tip, right? Have cash on hand that matches your risk tolerance for the risk that you see in your business. And risk being like being able to weather the storm of the unknown, right? And really mostly downside risk. Then on upside risk or opportunities, have a line of credit that you can draw down on if the opportunity has an expected return that's higher than the cost of debt, right? That's the pro tip. Figure out with your CFO exactly what numbers you should use. But that's number one. Number two, have a strategy for your salary versus profit distributions. We've talked about this before several episodes back, but set a monthly salary for the job you perform in the business, the rough market rate, pay yourself that monthly or biweekly or weekly, and then accumulate and separate in a different bank account your excess profits and quarterly pay yourself some portion of that. What that does is, if you think about it, instead of just scooping all the profits out every single month, if you look at your average cash balance, it kind of like builds and then comes down and then builds and then comes down. That's even kind of conservative. Like it offsets risk because if something happens in that building period, you have this cash on hand. And then the third thing is, this is really important. Listen, I know we've talked about real estate investing on here because I do a lot of real estate investing, but I think the principles are just sound general investing, like best practices. And the reality is, when do markets crash? Markets crash when there's forced selling. Why is there usually forced selling? There's usually forced selling because people don't have enough cash as a backup plan. And so they get forced to sell their assets, right, to try to survive because they're in the midst of a crisis. And so you need to have a backup plan while you're investing. And in this case, you're investing in sending cash out of your business to yourself personally to build wealth. So that's having a line of credit. That's having some level of personal liquidity, the ability to engage in inventory liquidation. Thinking of these things on the front end, though, before you take the cash out of the business, not on the back end once you realize there's a crisis. So step 4, distribute cash flow to owners. Have a strategy for how much idle cash you want to hold, and that should be aligned with your risk tolerance and the ability to take advantage of opportunities. have a strategy for paying yourself a regular salary versus quarterly profit distributions, and have a backup plan. So that brings us to step 5. My favorite. Take the cash flow from step 4 and buy assets, stock, real estate, other businesses. What are your thoughts on this, Dylan? I guess actually, personal question. You've determined that cash should come out of a D2C brand. Do you have any personal preferences on like asset classes that are good places to park money? I'm just curious.
I have some friends who do real estate as well, and I think that, like, especially in the States with some of the benefits there are to that asset class, I think you can definitely have good opportunity there. But I think for the majority of people, oftentimes to actually get a return in excess of the stock market, that takes a lot more time and energy versus some of the more like simple dollar cost averaging index fund type investing. So I think for most people, that's probably the path that makes the most sense. But obviously, I think to your point, like it's all up to whatever someone wants to do with their own money, and what they're comfortable with and what asset classes they like. You could also go practically gamble on Polymarket. You know, there's lots of lots of places you can go in and put your money. But I do think that you've read this book too. That I think maybe I can't remember if I read it before you or you recommended it to me. But the book is called Profit First. You basically set a constraint of like I am going to distribute X, Y, or Z. I love constraints because
Yeah.
I think it's so easy when you don't have one to just not hit your targets. I'm actually a very big fan of, to some degree, saying I'm going to distribute this much per quarter because that's what I want to, and I'm going to find a way to make that work. Now, obviously, you have some rules for yourself where it's like, hey, I'm not going to do it if I can't hit some sort of a target. But the whole idea is you have to have that constraint in place so that you're able to, work backwards from there to get it done, whether it's send that additional sale email or like do this or do that, because I think that, to your point, essentially what you want to have is a plan where you're going to grow your wealth personally, and you have to have a path to get there and work backwards from a goal. And I think that profit first mentality of having that kind of account set aside to pay yourself via distributions, I think from a workflow standpoint, it's harder in ecom than some other industries due to the lower predictability of revenue. But I still think it's possible, and maybe you just have to be a little bit more conservative with it.
And actually, Mike Michalowicz, the author of that book, talks about his own story at the beginning. And he talks about how, like, he had all intentions. He had all the intentions at the beginning of the year to like set aside money for his taxes and to pay himself a salary and to pay himself distributions of profit. But when faced with a decision, hey, like one of his team members, like, hey, we need to spend money on this. He'd look at the bank account and say, oh, the money's there, spend it, right? And literally just the act of physically moving your tax money to a different bank account and your salary to a different bank account and what you expect the profits to be for a month to a different bank account. When someone comes to you for something, you go look at what's left over and you're like, oh, I don't have as much as I thought. Should I invest? Is there a good ROI on this allocation of capital? And that's the magic, in my opinion. I think the other.
I think it's one of the best personal finance books I've ever read.
No, I mean it.
And it applies to business, personal finance. Like actually, it's more of a business book than a personal finance book, but it's excellent.
Well, it's not even like it's not super technical. It's not technical at all. It's very simple, but it's just so practical. It's like, dude, I can actually just do this like tomorrow if I wanted to, But so going back to like investing outside of your business to build wealth, right? Like I have a few rules that I follow. One is you have to enjoy the asset class. The best asset class you understand, you enjoy, and you have some amount of control over. Now, every asset class you have different amounts of control. Like index funds, the only control you have is how much you allocate to various index funds, right? But that is a great asset class if you have a very little understanding of individual businesses' performance in the public markets, right? But if you think through like buying assets you enjoy that fit your understanding level and that fit the control you want to have, you're going to make good decisions. And then the other thing is set a plan for the dollars of capital you want to invest. I used to try to set goals for like the return I wanted to get, but you don't like in some of these more passive plays, you don't have, you can't control what the return is going to be in any given quarter or year or whatever. And it's more of a game of deploying capital, deploying a specific amount of capital over time consistently that compounds as it grows, right? Some years it's 15%, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 10, but it averages out to whatever, 7, 8, 9. And so get obsessed with having a schedule. I want to invest 10K a month, or I want to invest 50K a quarter or 20K a quarter. And I'd say the other thing is, don't be afraid for it to be like small, $1,000 a month to start. Do the math. If you put $1,000 a month for 30 years into the S&P 500, do the math of what that's worth in 30 years. It's huge. So, and I think the last thing, I know I said this in step 4, but like, please hear this, set aside liquid capital for emergencies. You have to do this. If you don't, then you're going to pull these investments out, or you're going to liquidate them, or you're going to have to forced sell at some point to take care of an emergency. And furthermore, since we're talking about the connection between your business and your personal wealth building, you got to have personal liquid capital, going back to step 4, as part of your business's backup plan. So like, don't let the money burn a hole in your pocket. Like, keep some around in an emergency fund. And I'll even tell you right now, like, I recently had a realization with my real estate portfolio. I was growing it fairly aggressively. I set aside like a significant amount of liquid cash that I actually don't even have it in a money market fund. I probably could. It's not even, it's earning like nothing in a savings account. But I've decided that I've deployed so much capital over here, and there's risk associated with that, that like, I'm willing to take that big risk by just holding some extra cash and personal liquidity. And so if something happens, I don't think there's anything that could happen that is not insurable that would like wipe out my whole emergency fund, right? And so that is really, really important. Dylan, before I summarize here, any final thoughts you have on this 5-step process that we've gone through?
I think that it does start with how you actually make the business economically viable with the unit economics, the CAC to LTV, and all that. I think once you have that, the next step is revenue durability. So if I'm going to play the game of distributing cash flow and investing that and building that and creating wealth that way, time is how you generally build wealth doing that, and compounded yield over time. So thinking about durability to me is the key thing. I I find that sometimes doing something to make your business durable hurts short-term gains or short-term profits, and it can be a hard kind of path to go down because you're almost taking a step back to take 2 steps forward sometimes.
Yeah,
But I think it's important in all businesses, but I think in
totally.
consumer, it's maybe even more important due to how naturally undurable some of these businesses can be. Not all of them, but some of them. So I think my favorite word of the day would be durability. How
I
about
love it. I love it. Well, I'm going to summarize for everyone. So the formula for building wealth in all businesses, D2C included, it's always been build a business on a foundation of profitable unit economics, scaling those to create company level profit, optimizing your balance sheet so that you can distribute that cash flow to owners, and then take that cash flow and buy assets to build wealth. This formula withstands the test of time. It's true today. It will be true tomorrow. It's going to be true forever. And you don't have to wait for the next ecom asset bubble to build wealth. So that's a wrap. Episode 40. We're coming for you.